Hello, you're welcome to my channel. Please do well to like, subscribe, share, and also make your comments in the comment section. God bless you as you do that. So today, I want us to look at Romans 8:20. Romans 8:20. There are many believers today who feel that God was responsible for the fall of Adam, so that his plan of salvation can come to pass. They infer that God plotted the fall of Adam so that his salvation can come to pass, which to me seems like a double standard. Committing evil so that you can show forth good. That's not correct. And when you question them further, they always go back to the book of Romans 8:20 as a basis of their assumption. All right, so I want to throw more light on the book of Romans 8:20, letting us know what the Apostle Paul was trying to communicate to the Romans. So let's go straight down and read what Romans 8:20 is saying. All right, Romans 8:20. I'm going to be reading from the Amplified Version. For starters, it says, "For the creation was subject to frustration and futility, not willingly, but by the will of him who subjected it in hope." By the will of him who subjected it in hope. So when they read that particular line, they assume that God was the one that was responsible so that his salvation can come to pass. But that is not correct. So let us look at what Apostle Paul was trying to communicate to the Romans. To interest you to know that Romans 8:20 is not a standalone verse. Apostle Paul was actually throwing more light of things that were written in the Torah with respect to the creation of Adam and all the things that happened in the Garden of Eden, to bring, more light to the Romans to show forth God's plan of salvation for mankind. So for you to understand Romans 8:20, you have to go back to the Torah. You have to go back to the books of Genesis for you to understand what Romans 8:20 actually means. So let us do that very quickly. We go back to Genesis 1:26. We want to look at the creation of Adam. Genesis 1:26 says, "Then God said, Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." Now, when you look at that verse, you understand that one of the first things you are going to see from that verse is that God has a will. God has a will, and his will, encompasses his thoughts, his desires, and his power to bring forth the expressions in himself into reality, into physical manifestation. So Genesis 1:26 is showing us that God has a will, and it was through the will of God declaring his intentions to make man that he actually brought man into physical existence. Okay? And also in that scripture, we'll find out also that man had no choice in his creation. Man had no choice at all in his creation. We are trying to see what Apostle Paul meant by subjection. All right? By subjection. If you read that verse literally, you might accuse God. What it meant by subjection. So man had no choice in his creation. Then let us also look at the physical, let us also look at the residence of the first Adam in Eden. Let us also look at the book of Genesis 1:15. And it says in Genesis 1:15, let's see, is it Genesis 1:15? Not Genesis 1:15. Let's see. Genesis 2:15. Genesis 2:15. It said, "And then the Lord took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and keep it." So the book of Genesis 2:15 is also showing us that God exercised his willpower to make that choice for Adam to be in the garden. So Adam did not have the choice to choose his location. God made that choice for him. All right? we are looking at what it means for God to subject Adam. Then also we look at even the wife that Adam had, Eve, also in the book of Genesis. Adam was not the one who expressed the desire to have a wife. God was the one who made Eve and brought Eve to Adam. All right? Now, so we have clearly defined that one, Adam had no choice in his creation. Adam had no choice in how he was created. Adam had no choice in his location. Adam had no control over the things that happened in Eden with respect to the trees and the things that God placed there. He was just placed in that environment by God to tend to keep it. Even the mode of how he was going to function in the garden, he had no choice to determine what to do and what not to do. Everything was being subject to the will of God with respect to his operation in the garden. All right? So I believe you have understood what it means for God to subject Adam. Then what does it mean for God to subject Adam, to frustration and futility? Does that mean that God is wicked? Does that mean that God orchestrates evil? Why will God subject Adam to frustration and futility? Now, let us also go back to the book of Genesis so that we can understand. I don't want this video to be very long. Genesis 1:28. Genesis 1:28. He said, "Then God blessed them, and God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." This is from the New King James Version. So in this verse, we see God transferring his authority, because man has a free will. And man's free will came from God transferring his authority to man. Transferring his authority to man to have dominion over the earth and over the things he has created. And the dominion that God gave man was an act of legitimacy for man to be able to express his free will, to carry out whatever God has intended through him, which is also subject to the will of God. Because man's will cannot override God's will. Man's will is subject to the will of God. And that is why anyone who knows that he's a child of God should understand this fact, that your will is subject to God's will. So you cannot do and behave anyhow that you want to behave if you have that understanding. The will of man moves within the confines, within the perimeter of the will of God. So God transferred authority to man to be able to make choices, to be able to make decisions, which is subject to his will. So what does it mean that God subjected man to frustration? What does it mean? What it means is that God is the creator of heavens and the earth, everything that we see today. And there is nothing that actually begins today that has not finished with God. God knows the ending even from the beginning. There is nothing that happens today that has not been finished in God. So God, in his foreknowledge, was aware that Adam was going to fall. But God placed Adam in the garden in hope that Adam will do the right thing. In hope that Adam will do the right thing. There is a particular Bible translation that caught my attention yesterday while I was preparing for this video. It's the Lamsa Bible. The Lamsa Bible. It says, "For man was made subject to vanity, not willingly, but by reason of him who gave him free will, in the hope he will choose rightly." So God placed man in the garden with the hope that that the first Adam will choose rightly. Even when God also knew that he will fail, but he gave him a chance to prove himself. He gave him a chance to prove himself. He gave him a chance to exercise the dominion, the free will that he has given to him. All right? So it's very important that we know that God does not interfere with our free will. He can only guide, caution us, show us the way, show us the direction, but he doesn't interfere. The right of choice belongs to us. So we could see that in the garden, God gave Adam certain instructions. Don't eat this, don't touch that. But the right of choice still belonged to Adam. So God knew that Adam would fail, but he still gave him an opportunity of choice to prove him wrong. So Apostle Paul is trying to tell the Romans that the creation was subjected to futility, which means that at a point in time, everything that the first Adam did will become futile. Everything that the first Adam did will become futile because of sin. Why? Because God placed him in that environment. Because God placed him in that environment. Apostle Paul was not accusing God that God was responsible. That everything the creation, everything that man was doing, we come to frustration, we come to futility because he would make a wrong choice. And because the Creator was the one who subjected him to the environment where he made that wrong choice. The Creator was the one who subjected him to the environment where he made that wrong choice. That is what Apostle Paul was trying to communicate to the Romans. Now let's look at the next verse, Romans 8:21. Romans 8:21. I also read from the Amplified. That the creation itself will also be freed from its bondage to decay into the glorious freedom of children of God. So the hope that God had were in two forms. The first was that God expressed his hope that Adam will make the right decision by giving him the power to make the right decision. That was the first section of that hope. Then the second section of that hope, because of God's foreknowledge, was that should in case Adam makes the wrong decision and fails, then he placed a solution ahead of time so that what the first Adam has done that has brought him and his descendants into captivity, so that they can be liberated, so that they can be set free from that bondage. See, that the creation itself will also be freed from its bondage to decay into the glorious freedom of the children of God. So Apostle Paul was explaining to the Romans the plan of salvation, how God exercises free will in providing the plan of salvation to mankind, by first of all placing man in the environment, expressing his hope that man will make the right choice. Expressing his hope that man will make the right choice by giving him dominion of choice, dominion of free will, for him to express himself in the garden. And also that through God's foreknowledge, knowing fully well that man would fall, because there is nothing that happens that is surprising to God. God also placed a solution ahead of time. So that even when man, the first Adam, made the wrong choice by disobeying God, there is a hope for him to be delivered. There is a hope for him to be liberated. There is a hope for him to be set free. That is exactly what Romans 8:20 is talking about. So Romans 8:20 is not saying that God orchestrated the fall of Adam, God plotted it, or God, planned it with Satan for man to fall. There is nothing like that. So I hope these have brought some form of contextual meanings and understanding to you, my viewer that is watching, for you to also, read in context and also understand in context. And for you to also know that what we call the New Testament today are explanations by different authors, trying to throw more light into the things that were hidden in the Old Testament and bringing it through the revelation of Christ for us to understand. Because in the Old Testament is like a shadow. But the authors of the New Testament now explain the scriptures through the revelation of Christ to bring that which was hidden, which the people didn't really understand, and bring it into limelight so that we can see and understand the scriptures from the angle of Jesus Christ. So next time someone tries to accuse God because of Romans 8:20, you can show him this video and also do more research on what I've said to understand what it means for God to subject a man to futility, and also place his salvation in hope, so that one day what man did, man will be set free from it. God bless you and have a wonderful day. Goodbye. Don't forget also to like and share, subscribe, and also make your comments in the comment section. Do have a great day. Goodbye.